Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Hart Bennett. Today I'm going to read chapter 19 from my second book, Seven Sisters Overland. Jane held little Lanny close to her bosom as she moved out of the hospital and followed Eleanor and the other sisters toward the Isabel. She was crying tears of sorrow for Alinda May and tears of joy for the tiny baby that was now in her care. Everything happened so fast after the explosion she could scarcely take it all in. She looked for Hugh on the levee. It was still a chaotic scene. Rescuers were removing the identified dead from the wharf and taking them in wagons to the new cemetery to await burial. Those who were wounded were still being transported to the warehouse hospital. Passengers were still frantic as they looked for their missing loved ones. Jane wiped her eyes, but couldn't see Hugh anywhere in the throng of people. Maybe he was looking for her. Hugh's last words were, "Stay with Sister Wise. I'm going to help with the rescue." After she boarded the Isabel and climbed to the top deck, she looked out over the levee. Her eyes scanned every inch of the crowd. Still no Hugh. She looked around the ship, trying to see him or her brothers or father. Where could they be? When the sisters got to the place they were to occupy on deck, Eleanor ordered Susanna and the twins to sit down. "What injuries did the doctor find, twinsies?" They had since quit blubbering, but they were still pretty shaken up. Phoebe looked like a partially wrapped mummy with her 3 bandages on her arm and 1 wrapped around her head. She started enumerating. "I have 3 or 4 cuts on my arms and head, and they put 5 stitches in this deep cut here," she said, pointing to her shoulder. "It hurt terribly, but I bit on some rolled up leather and Susanna held me tight." "You 2 are very lucky girls," said Eleanor. "It could have been so much worse. Fanny, you look like you don't have as many bandages as Phoebe has. That's good." "Well, I bet my injuries hurt worse than hers," she said, feeling sorry for herself. "Something fell on my leg, and just look at this big bruise." She pulled up her skirt and pantaloons to reveal her thigh. "And this cut on my forehead has 3 stitches and will probably leave a scar." Even in their misery, they were trying to outdo each other. "Keep still and rest now, twinsies," said Eleanor. "Caroline, Lavinia, and I have work to do." Lavinia had already started to make a list of the families aboard the Isabel on the last page of her journal. Eleanor turned to Caroline. "I'll go to the back of the ship and work my way towards you. You start here and come towards me." The 2 sisters went to work, comforting, consoling, and nursing those who were grieving and wounded. It was a somber scene and a daunting task. As they worked, they began to feel more spots on their own bodies and discovered a few cuts and bruises they hadn't noticed before. Right now, they had more important things to worry about than themselves. They found families that only had minor cuts and scrapes, and others who had lost 1 or 2 of their family members and were inconsolable. Some had loved ones who were badly scalded, or who had limbs torn off, or who had broken bones or teeth knocked out. Several had to stay in Lexington for treatment. No one escaped the flying debris, but the luggage wall around the Saints helped slow it down. Caroline worked through the survivors until she came to the Button family. The first wife, Sister Josephine, was weeping noiselessly as she comforted her 3 adolescent children, also in tears. The second wife, Sister Emily, was moaning eerily in Brother Button's arms. Caroline could only see 3 of their small children at their feet. "Brother Button, can I help here?" "Where are your other 2 children?" "They're gone," he sobbed. "They were killed in the explosion." Caroline looked helplessly toward the first wife for answers. She was grieving as though she had lost her own children. "How did it happen?" Caroline asked her. "Emily was sleeping in the middle of her little ones," she sobbed, "and a piece of iron from the boiler fell down. It missed her but landed on Babette and Bartholomew." "Oh, I am so sorry, Brother and Sister Button," she said, turning to them. "Is there anything I can do?" "We'll be all right, Sister," cleverly said Brother Button. "The knowledge of the resurrection helps us go on." Your family is an inspiration," Caroline offered. "God bless you all." She moved away from the Buttons and tried to find a spot where she could let her emotions go. She thought leaving her family friends And home in England was the hardest thing she'd ever done, though. She had gone through, but that was nothing compared to the sorrows and losses many of the saints experienced in the last 3 hours. Eleanor noticed Caroline crying from across the deck. She moved to comfort her. As she got closer, Caroline questioned, "How do these families continue on to Zion and leave their children or their spouses to be buried by someone else?" Eleanor put her arms around her. "There's only one way, Caroline, and that's through their faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. They know they will be with their loved ones again, once in the next life, if they stay true to the commandments and covenants they make with God in this life." Caroline gave her a hug. "I do love that part of the gospel," she said. Lavinia wrote down name after name of the suffering Saluda victims and listed their injuries out to the side, including her own. Lavinia Triplet can't hear in her right ear. Then she attributed to the loud explosion. She felt like something had popped inside her head. She noticed blood on her finger when she felt inside her ear. There was a stabbing pain she couldn't relieve with rubbing, but she forgot her own troubles as she listed members of the family who were staying in Lexington, either in the hospital or in the grave. She was glad she wasn't listed there. The survivors from the Saluda were all stationed together on the deck of the Isabel. This included a few passengers who were not Latter-day Saints, but who wanted to take advantage of the free trip to Omaha offered by Captain Miller. As Lavinia made her way around the smokestack to continue making her list, she couldn't believe her eyes. There was Sir Evelyn, sitting with his back to the bulwark, his arms around his sheepdog, his eyes closed. "Sir Evelyn, you're alive," she said as she rushed up to him and knelt down. "I am so glad you were preserved. I see one of your dogs didn't make it. Which one is this?" Sir Evelyn looked up, and a smile crossed his lips. "Miss Triplet, you made it through." Then his voice dropped low. "I'm afraid poor Benji didn't survive, but Buster did, and I'm grateful for that." She looked at Sir Evelyn's dirty, tattered trousers. One leg was torn up to his thigh, revealing a large bandage around his knee and calf. "How did you get your injury?" "I don't remember much until I woke up, half in the water and half on shore. I must have been blown off the ship and twisted my leg when I landed. I can hardly put any weight on it. My knee is throbbing terribly, but they gave me this cane, and it really helps. Maybe you should stay in Lexington to get more treatment for it. They've got many others from the Saluda who are in worse condition than I am. I can suffer here as well as I can suffer in their hospital. It's just a matter of healing time." "Well, I'm glad you made it, Sir Evelyn," she said sincerely as she got up and excused herself to continue her counting. Jane had long since found a spot on the deck to sit down. She had a Linda May's satchel and hoped there were nappies, baby clothes, and blankets inside. So far, Lanny was cooperating fully as he slept through all of the aftermath of the explosion and embarkation. Inside the bag, she was relieved to find what she needed for him. There was everything except Mother's milk. She began to recall when her own little Brigham was a baby and the care she gave him then. But what would she do now for Mother's milk? She looked around at the families huddled together, who were trying to recover from the shock and devastation of the Saluda. She needed Eleanor, but couldn't see her. Eleanor had finished interviewing all the Saluda passengers on her end of the ship and was now looking for her sisters and a place to rest when she spotted Jane and Lanny sitting a few yards away from Susanna and the twins. "Where is your husband, Jane?" Jane was relieved Eleanor was there, but now she was reminded that she hadn't found Hugh yet. I don't know, she said fearfully. "I'll go find him," said Eleanor. "Eleanor, before you go, I have a big concern." Tears began to drip. Then she blurted out, "What am I going to do about Lanny? I don't have any milk to give him. He'll die if he doesn't get milk." She was starting to get hysterical, just like she did when Brigham died, and she wasn't able to think straight. "Calm down, Jane. Here's what I want you to do. When he wakes up and is hungry, I want you to fasten him onto your breast as though you have milk to feed him. Let him nurse until you count to 100. It will be painful, but when you reach 100, fasten him on your other breast and pray as you count to 100 again. Then I want you to give him to Sister Sophronia Jobson and let her nurse him. She is still nursing her own baby and should have plenty of extra milk. If you do this each time he needs feeding, he will stimulate your breast, and soon you will produce milk for him and won't have to pass him off to Sister Jobson. I'll go speak to her and see if she will consent to be his wet nurse." "That would be wonderful. Thank you, Eleanor. I don't know what I would do without you on this journey." "We'll make it through together, Jane. You just take care of Lanny, and I'll see about Sister Jobson and finding Hugh." Eleanor made her way to the foot of the gangway, where Captain Miller was assisting the few remaining saluted passengers coming aboard. "Captain Miller, have Hugh Clotworthy and Thomas Devereux and his 3 sons come on board yet?" "I believe they are meeting with Mr. Smoot in the levee office," he replied. Eleanor's mind began to speculate. She knew President Tippett was staying to help in Lexington with President Smoot. His counselors, Presidents Larkin and Pinkerton, had stayed with the other half of their company on the Pride of the West, which was well on its way to Omaha by now. So she concluded the Isabel needed new leadership. That was probably why President Smoot was talking to Hugh and the Devereux. After her little exchange with Captain Miller, it wasn't long until Jane's relatives came out of the levee office with President Smoot and made their way to the Isabel. Eleanor was relieved to see them all walking without visible signs of injury. Upon learning Hugh was called to be the president of the Isabel Company of Saints, she clasped his hands to congratulate him. Then, with a huge smile, she said, "Jane is on board the Isabel, and she has a fantastic surprise for you." Hugh excused himself and left his father-in-law and 2 brothers-in-law talking with Captain Miller. He hastily made his way up the gangway, where he moved through the suffering saints looking for Jane. He finally spotted her with her back to him. He was so glad to see her. "Jane," he called as he rushed toward her. She turned around and revealed the baby in her arms. "Hugh," was all she could say. "What's this? What are you doing with Lanny?" Jane fixed her gaze on Hugh, bit her lip, and cried. There was nothing else she could do. It dawned on Hugh that Alinda May must not have made it. "Alinda May?" he questioned. "She gave Lanny to me before she died. To us." Hugh knelt down and gathered her and Lanny in his arms. He was overcome with emotion. "God has blessed us, Jane," he finally said. "We get another chance to raise a son." Jane didn't know that joy could be so exquisite. The injured and mourning saints on the Isabel suffered mostly in muffled silence as they lamented their losses and injuries from the Saluda. After the luggage crew loaded the rescued luggage from the sinking Saluda onto the Isabel, they were the last to come on aboard. The crew was physically and emotionally spent and desperately needed rest as they sought out their families. A blanket of sleep lovingly fell over the entire company for the next several hours, and they slept peacefully as the Isabel pulled away from the wharf and crawled up the river. When they awoke, they were again saddled with the sorrow of their situation, but their sleep had given them renewed hope and faith to move forward to Zion with their brothers and sisters. As Lavinia was rustling around after her nap, George approached her. "Sister Triplet," he said warmly, "I am so gratified you escaped injury." "Thank you, Brother Careless. I am equally gratified that you are in satisfactory condition." He forged on. "President Clotworthy has requested that you and I sing and play for the grieving saints. He said music would do more to soothe them than anything else. Do you feel well enough to do that?" "I would love to sing something, but I'm having trouble hearing out of my right ear." "Have you tried to sing?" he ventured with a worried look. "No, but would you listen to me and see if I'm on pitch?" "Yes," George said. "Can you match this pitch?" He sang a note in the middle range. "Ah." Lavinia sang a little bit under the note. George took his thumb and motioned slightly upward with it. "Ah." She slid her note up a fraction and met his pitch. "That is good," he said. "Now let me sing a higher pitch." She listened carefully and then matched the high pitch perfectly. A grin spread across both their faces. "I think you can do it," he said. "Let's try, Brother Careless. I know your beautiful violin playing will support me and help me cover up any mistakes I might make." George took his violin from its case. "I'm so glad your violin didn't go down with the ship," Lavinia said sincerely. I always use it for my pillow at night, he said. I sent it with my family in the first dinghy when it was sent to shore. I sent it with a family in the first dinghy that was sent to shore. This violin means a lot to me. It belonged to my father. On his deathbed, he gave it to me and told me to take good care of it. I was only 10 years old at the time, and I've been playing it ever since. As they moved to the front where the saints were stationed, George began to play a soothing introduction to one of Lavinia's favorite hymns. She listened carefully and hummed along to tune her pitch to his strings. The Lord is my shepherd, no want shall I know. I feed in green pastures, safe folded I rest. He leadeth my soul where the still waters flow, restores me when wandering, redeemed when oppressed. As she repeated the last two lines, she and George moved to another spot on the deck. The saints were touched by the message of the song and the beauty of her voice, blending with the mellow strings. Through the valley and shadow of death though I stray, since thou art my guardian, no evil I fear. Thy rod shall defend me, thy staff be my stay. No harm can befall with my comforter near. No harm can befall with my comforter near. George and Lavinia saw many tears being shed, but they also saw many smiles and bright countenances. No one had a knit brow or anger written on their face. Their faith in the Lord Jesus Christ was evident, and they were overcome with the beauty of what they heard. "Could you please sing it again?" said a voice belonging to Sir Evelyn, who was sitting with the saints at the far end of the ship. "That was absolutely beautiful. I've never heard anything like that sung in the church I attend." Lavinia felt a little awkward at this request, and George was a little disquieted to see Sir Evelyn on board the Isabel. He imagined he would be staying in Lexington, but there he was. "We don't want to wear out our welcome," said George politely. No, I could listen to you two all day. It takes my mind off my injuries." Lavinia looked at George for signs that he was agreeable to the request. George shrugged his shoulders half as if to say, "Why not?" And the two musicians began again. This time the song almost sounded like a different hymn because of George varying his accompaniment and interludes. He was a master violinist, and the saints reveled in the beauty of the 23rd Psalm once again. That's the end of chapter 19. Over and out.